Hello, everyone.
I'm Carl.
And I'm Em.
Welcome to our podcast discussing all of the latest books. This is our seventh episode, and we will be discussing It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. We'll be saving our ratings until the very end.
We promise to give you all of our honest opinions on all the characters, chapters, and scenarios. We don't mean any harm to any authors. This is solely our opinion. We promise, as always, to call them like we read them.
Period. So, this book does not actually have any trigger warnings at the beginning. It absolutely should, as we are going to talk about. Emily and I are both children of domestic violence, and so this is going to come from a very personal experience. Our opinions might be a little personal, so bear with us as we go through that journey. I might rant and be a little angry sometimes, and there will be spoilers.
If you don't want to hear how this book ends, pause here, go read it, and then come back to this episode.
Let's get into it.
Right.
To start us out, I'm going to read a couple of different things. There is a quote on the back of the book that says, "Sometimes the one who loves you is the one who hurts you the most." And then the dedication is, "For my father, who tried his very best not to be his worst, and for my mother, who made sure we never saw him at his worst." And then there's just a little note from the author in the back that I want to read. But also, before we start, I just want to say that there are two links in the back of the book that are resources. One is for if you're a victim of domestic violence or if you know someone who could use assistance in a dangerous situation. And then also there's a link for resources for homeless individuals. So if that applies to you, feel free to check those out. There's also a ton of other resources, maybe some in your state or local shelters and stuff like that too. We hope that you do check that out and get help.
I do want to mention that the top triggers that I think included in this is suicidal thoughts, forced sexual content, domestic violence, homelessness. There's pretty much all of that in this book. So I think that if any of those are your triggers, I would read more into this book and everything before you continue further if you have not read it yet. And if you have, we will be talking about that sensitive content as well.
Yeah, so be sure to take care of yourself, do some self-care, and make sure this doesn't take you back to a place you don't want to go. But so this little author's note also will give you an intro if you don't know what the book's about. So she says, "In the past, I've always said I write for entertainment purposes only. I don't write to educate, persuade, or inform. This book is different. This book was not entertainment for me. It was the most grueling thing I have ever written. At times, I wanted to hit the delete button and take back the way Ryle had treated Lilly. I wanted to rewrite the scenes where she forgave him, and I wanted to replace those scenes with a more resilient woman, a character who made all of the right decisions at all the right times. But those weren't the characters I was writing. That wasn't the story I was telling. I wanted to write something realistic to the situation my mother was in, a situation a lot of women find themselves in. I wanted to, and men, for the record, by the way. I wanted to explore the love between Lilly and Ryle so that I would feel what my mother felt when she had to make the decision to leave my father, a man she loved with all her heart. I sometimes wonder how different my life would have been if my mother had not made the choice she did. She left someone she loved so that her daughters would never think that that kind of relationship was okay. She wasn't rescued by another man, a knight in shining armor. She took the initiative to leave my father on her own, knowing she was about to embark on a completely different kind of struggle with added stress as a single mother. It was important to me that Lily's character embodied that same empowerment. Lily made the ultimate decision to leave for the sake of her daughter, even though there was a slight possibility that Ryle could have eventually changed for the better. Some risks are never worth taking, especially when those risks have failed you in the past. Before I wrote this book, I had a lot of respect for my mother, and now that I've finished it and was able to explore a tiny fraction of the pain and struggle she went through to get to where she is today, I only have one thing to say to her. I want to be you when I grow up." And listen, that's the end of the book. And I was already sobbing by the time we got to that, but man, does that hit me dead in the chest, and it makes me want to cry right now thinking about it. But all right, Em, so let's go ahead and get into it. And again, trigger warning, spoilers, all of that. Take care of yourselves.
So this is a story about Lilly, Atlas, and Ryle, and all of them are in this situation. It's kind of has a little bit of flashback and flash forward that happens. In the present, you more have Lilly and Ryle, and then in the past, you have Lilly and Atlas. So
Yeah.
with chapter 1, we start on the rooftop.
What people would call
I
their
don't
meet cute, although it doesn't end well, but still.
Yes. Gonna be honest, this is my second time reading this book. So it was reliving those emotions of, oh, Ryle's a good guy starting out. So a lot of my comments that I have wrote down are positive, which it ends up not being. But so it starts off on a rooftop. And to be honest, if you didn't know how the book ended, it's a really cute scene. They meet on the rooftop. He's really angry because a kid had got a gun and accidentally shot his brother and killed him, and he was the neurosurgeon, and he had to disclose that news to the family and everything. And so he's really angry on this rooftop, throwing chairs, all that stuff. And she's just basically up there because she's just trying to get out of her head because her father has passed away. And so they're experiencing all these emotions, and I really do like the naked truths that
Yes.
they give. I feel like that's a really good idea in any relationship, to have like that safe word of like, okay, do you want to hear something you may not want to hear? And I feel like that's what it was. And so I thought that was really, really cute. So Lily's father is the one that started with domestic violence towards her mother. And a lot of Atlas and her story were flashbacks to those kind of
Yeah.
moments. And she basically at his funeral was told to get up there and make a speech. And she stood up there and said, here's a list of things that is good about my father, and says nothing.
2 whole
So I
minutes
really, yes.
until someone comes up there
And
and sits
so
her down.
yeah, her, I believe it was her uncle.
Yeah.
But to me, like, that was a very powerful scene for me, because that was her way of basically sticking it to him in other aspects. And so I really did think that that was a cool scene. She just pretty much said, oh, I'm pretty sure everybody thinks I just froze and, couldn't say any more or whatever. But that wasn't the case. But I also, which in the moment of reading it, I did not remember that he had snapped a picture to blow up the picture and hang it in
Yeah.
his apartment of her. But at first I was like, that's a little creepy. I don't know if I'd want a random stranger I just met taking a picture of me. And the fact that she didn't like say anything to me either was a little weird.
Also, again, before we move on, the eulogy at her dad's funeral, I just want to read what her mom said to her later on about it, because you're right. She just assumed everyone, even her mom, which I think she knew her mom was pretending, but still assumed that she froze and she was just too overcome with sadness to keep going. But later on, she finds
Yeah.
out that's not the truth. And this is what her mom said to her. And if nothing else was good in this book, this alone had me sobbing. Okay? Makes me tear up right now thinking about trying to read it. The day you gave your father's eulogy, I know you didn't freeze up, Lily. You stood at that podium, can't even talk. You stood at that podium and refused to say a single good thing about that man. It was the proudest I have ever been of you. You were the only one in my life who ever stood up for me. You were strong when I was scared. Be that girl, Lily. Brave and bold. And oh my gosh, if that's not like, I don't know about you, but like that's something that I would want to emulate. I want to be that kind of person, whether it's my personal experience, whether it's somebody else that I love or whatever, to stand up for somebody like that.
And I think too, in her mother's situation, she didn't have anybody in her corner.
Hmm.
So I think the fact that she raised somebody to still be in her corner, even though she was basically raised in the same situation. So she raised her to be a little bit stronger than she was. And I think that that was really relatable in a sense as
Yeah, no,
well.
I agree. And we don't get a whole lot of that. We have scenes where mom is encouraging her to not tell the truth and to lie, when you go to the hospital and different things like that. And so we don't see the moments where her mom might have taught her, you don't accept this. So it was really cool to get that at the end when her mom was like, oh, no, no, honey, I'm the proudest of you that I've ever been in my entire life. Like that was
Yeah.
thank you almost. It was almost like a thank you. And that was something that
And to
shook
notate, the
me.
main reason why she was having her not tell us is because the dad was the mayor.
Yeah,
So she was trying to like
his
cover up
reputation.
basically, yeah, in his career, which is what Lily ends up putting her same situation with Ryle, or she also didn't want to harm his career by reporting him in the
Which and
future.
we can talk about that more in the next book, but that actually really disappoints me. Because, like, she
Yes.
was so disappointed at her mother for that being more important than telling the truth, and then she turns around and does that.
Yeah. The next chapter, we find out basically her confidant in her past, she actually writes letters to Ellen DeGeneres because she finds an out in watching her on TV where she doesn't have to worry about things.
Well, like, and
And
by write letters, like, she writes letters in her journal, but she doesn't actually send them to
she
Ellen.
doesn't send them. Yeah. Yeah. And so she ends up finding that there is a homeless kid that's living in a home that's been abandoned behind her house. And she starts bringing him food, clothing. She has him come in and start showering and stuff like that in her house.
The
And
only good
so
guy in any book that I've ever fallen for, I just wanna say that. I love Atlas, I'm getting giddy thinking about Atlas, but, like, this is the only hero I would go for.
I really like the relationship with Lily and Atlas really started off very from a good place. Like even though she knew she was risking her safety by giving him food, because I guarantee the dad found out that she was giving away basically free items out of his house, he would have been ticked.
Absolutely.
But to basically give him things just selflessly and without really any ask back was very strong of her in my opinion,
I
because
agree.
I mean if her dad had found out he would have blown a gasket. And I find it crazy, she does mention a couple times like how her dad doesn't donate to charity but yet he goes to charity functions and stuff like that.
I love that, like, he never noticed that all of his clothes were missing. That was a little
Yes,
confusing to
yes,
me, I was like
or food.
yeah, well, and, like, maybe he doesn't cook, okay, maybe mom cooks, but, like, your favorite shirt was missing, how you not realize that? You know what I mean, or something? I don't
Yeah.
know, it just seemed a little too good to be true.
And then to me, also opening the trash can and not seeing like two of everything, because it seemed to be between 4 and 5 p.m. that she was home and they were gone.
Yeah,
So to notice that she ate two snacks and two sodas in that time period or something like that, I find a little weird.
I will
But
say, she was very, very brave for, like, inviting him into the home. It's
daily,
one thing to, like, give him food and clothes and send him on his way, it's another to invite him into your home alone and let him get in the shower and things like that. Now
because I guarantee, like any other parent, even outside of a domestic violence situation, comes
oh,
home and there's a naked
absolutely.
kid in the same home as your daughter in the shower. Flip
Well,
out,
and also
flip out.
because she was 15 and he was 18, so it seems suspicious
Yes.
automatically anyways because of their age difference. Not that it's a terrible age difference, but still. And so it's like it seems as if he's preying on a younger girl and some naked teenage boy.
Well, and then we forward to meeting Alyssa, and she
I
comes
love
in.
her.
Lily has bought a flower shop, and it's basically just an empty building. And I grew up in a small town that had a square and all that, and I just picture one of those old buildings
Yes.
that needed to be recreated, basically. And so I just imagine window shopping, and she's just like, "Oh, help wanted," and she comes in. She basically tells her she's going to work for free. We end up finding out her husband is filthy rich, and she's going to work for
What a
free,
lot.
which we never end up finding out whether or not she cashes the checks ever.
We
But
don't out. I
she,
wish we did.
yeah. But Alyssa, I have to say, is one of my top favorite characters, is
I
just
agree.
because her brother Ryle. So to know that she supported Lily through and through, no matter what, I really appreciated that, because you don't find that very
No,
often. Usually,
absolutely.
they're going to go with the person that they know the most.
Absolutely, and most people are blinded to it too. It's not the victim that has a misperception. There's normally a misperception to the rest of the public. But I loved that she would be like, as his sister, this is probably what I should say. But as your friend, this is what's going to happen. I love
Yeah.
that because it is hard trying to
I feel
balance
like
those two
that's
things.
sometimes whenever I tell you something, I'm like, hey, so this is what I probably should say, but this is what actually is the case. And then you just take it as you will.
Well, and I like that.
But
I think those are the kind of people you should have in your life. Like, I don't want someone who's just going to pacify me. Like, tell me the truth. If it hurts my feelings, it hurts my feelings. But don't lie to me.
I mean, this is what I should say, but this is the truth. So whether you want that or not, here here's the good and the bad.
Yeah, well, and there's like there are situations that call for pacifying, and then there are
Yeah.
situations like Lily's where it's serious enough that I'm gonna have to call it like I see it because it's necessary and it's your literal safety.
Well, and I really enjoy as well in the scene where she falls in the flower shop and Ryle ends up showing up. So this is like 6 months
Mhm.
after she initially met him on the
Yeah.
rooftop. And he walks in because Alyssa calls him and says, "Hey, my boss just fell. Come help her." And he says the naked truth. He still wants to sleep with her.
Mhm.
And that was his first naked truth that he had told her. And Alyssa's reaction when she walks into that just cracked me up. I would probably had that same reaction thinking that these two people for the first time have met and this is what you're going to tell this person.
Well, she was like,
But
"That's my boss, and that's what I just got my first job ever, and that's what you say to my boss? Come on, dude."
yes.
And then I will say too, before we pass from when she called her husband and was like, "My boss fell," he's like, "Babe, what do you mean your boss? You don't even have a job," because he's drunk, obviously.
Yeah.
But I thought that was so cute and funny. Just like it doesn't really add to the story, but we get to see like her and Marshall's relationship a little bit through those little things, and I really like that.
Yes. And I really did enjoy a couple chapters later where Ryle is going up and down her apartment building, knocking on 29
Yeah.
doors to find her door. And so he ends up getting down on his knees and like begs her to sleep with him.
Mhm. He's
And
like, "I just can't stop thinking about
now
you."
yeah, now I look back on it and I don't have as the same emotions, but in the moment I was like, "Oh, that is so cute." I personally do feel a little bit like Ryle maybe had a couple relationships that ended badly because of something similar to what happened, or maybe he got close to what was happening and he cut it off. And so I feel like he really didn't know how to react appropriately to situations where he actually generally liked a girl. And so I feel like that was inappropriate, but still in fictional book character sweet.
It's
So I guess
really
you could say.
hard because fictional man can get away with so much, and it's like, "Oh, we
Yes.
love that." And then it's like, but a real life man, absolutely not. Like, don't even look at me the wrong way. You cannot. Like, it's anything. So it's hard to
Well, and she
separate
did have the same
that for Ryle.
yeah, she did have the same reaction I would have, though. She was like, "How in the world did you know where I lived?" And he's like, "Oh, you told me on the rooftop 6 months ago." I would probably at that point be like, "It's so weird that you remembered
I
that."
agree. And
So,
you showing also I think that's just me personally though. You showing up at my door and like getting on your knees and begging me to have sex with you would yeah,
pathetic.
that wouldn't be a turn on for me. I'd be like, "Please get away. What are you doing? You're
Yeah.
a stranger. You might be her brother, but I don't know her really either." So it was weird to me. But in fictional land, it's like, "Oh gosh, he's like so dedicated. He's so into her."
Well, and outside of what ends up happening, I really appreciated how hard he really tried to woo her, sending her flowers from her own flower shop. That was so sweet to me.
Also part of the cycle, and I think that was what she was hinting at
Yes.
with those sorts of things, is like there is that
Yes.
honeymoon phase before we hit the disaster. But I
Yes.
do wish, and we'll talk about this definitely more in the next book, but I do wish that part of DV was emphasized a little bit more other than just the physical. And obviously there's more than just physical, but the emotional abuse too. She does hint at it with Lily's dad, who would always apologize
Yeah.
right after, and she almost wanted something to happen because she knew the next few weeks would be good weeks and things like that. But I almost wish we would have
Mhm.
done a little bit more educating about that too while we were writing this. But
Yeah. I do think there was some parts in that that was emphasized, but I think it was more so the I'm sorries rather than like, oh, here's buttloads of flowers to apologize on that behalf.
yeah,
But it really emphasized more on the events rather than the aftermath. So I did like the party where they went to Adelisa and Marshall's house, and
yeah,
I love Devin. Devin
I
is the gay best friend that everybody needs. I was very disappointed that there's little to nothing about him because I was like, oh, he's gonna become one of those main side characters.
yeah,
And then I think he's only shows up one other time,
yeah. We
maybe.
see it 2
If
times, I
that.
think.
Yeah, and it was very disappointing to me. But I really enjoy that he was just like, what do you need me to be tonight? You need to be your gay best friend, or do you need me to be your boy toy? She's like, boy toy. Let's play that. And her whole thing is to make how he's going to leave out the door, or she's going out to leave after she has an altercation with him of being jealous about the whole thing, and he just picks her up and carries her to the bedroom, and everybody's just like, okay, I guess we're just not going to see them for the rest of the night. And I was like, okay, well, I
Yeah.
guess it's not weird, but
I think that
I
that moment right there, and then he admits he wants a relationship and he can't stop thinking about her and he doesn't just want a one night stand.
mhm,
And he says, "How do I prove that to you?" And she says, "Don't sleep with me." And then they attempt an actual relationship from there.
yeah.
That's where it got me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that like, without knowing about what happened
Yeah.
up to that point, I really did appreciate what he was doing. He was taking it at her pace, doing what she asked, but I feel like that was almost like to swoon her in and then shatter her. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, domestic violence to me is almost like a pottery class. You're forming the pot and you're trying to like get the pot to grow and shape into what you want it to be, and then something messes up and you can squash it down and then you have to build it back up. To me, that's what a domestic violence relationship relates to most. And so I feel like that's what he was doing. He was building up this vase, and then it gets to that point of crushing it, and then he builds it back up.
I think that's perfect. And I agree. It's hard to tell from this book alone whether or not Ryle actually intended what happened. We don't know. It does say he's never really had a serious relationship. That doesn't mean he's never harmed someone before. Whether it been a
Hmm.
girlfriend or a friend or a stranger at a bar or things like that, we don't know. But we do know
Yeah.
that he's never had a serious relationship. So whether or not this is the first time this has happened or not, I wish would have been talked about more, because oftentimes there are other, and not necessarily that Lilly would have seen, but maybe she would have seen in other ways, but like his sister would have known about, or other things that other people could have picked up
For his
on, his
parents.
parents, things like that, that I wish we would have dove more into. Obviously, a lot of people don't want to hear about the villain's backstory though, so that's probably why we didn't. But
And I think there's instance in childhood that are covered up by the parents and being like, oh, it's just an angst teenager. And based on what Alyssa's reaction was to me, I feel like there probably was some
I agree.
instances that she was like, okay, well, I can see where he could do that in the future. And maybe because he wasn't that serious about anybody in the past, it didn't get to the severity of what this relationship did. But I feel like there was, just because Alyssa was so, I know I should tell you to stay with him, but you need to go. I think just based off of those reactions,
I
it
think even
didn't seem like a
before that,
surprise
I
to
think
her.
when I think it might have been the stairs incident is when Alyssa
Hmm.
found out that something, and instead of saying at that point she needed to leave, she told Ryle, "You need to explain to her what's wrong with you," basically. That
Yes.
part is the only part with Alyssa that I was not happy about, because at that point, she should have been telling her to leave. She should have been telling her to leave from day
Yeah.
one, but if she knew those things about her brother, she should have told Lily, I think. But I also find it interesting
But
that,
it could have been that it was not ever that severe. So she may have just been like, oh, you have like anger management
but
problems
that's
where you
what,
just like lash out.
yeah, but I would think, like, if I knew my brother had anger management problems, then when we went to dinner one night and his hand was injured and Lily's face was injured, I would assume that's what it was. Even if you told me a completely
Yeah.
different story that made total sense, I still would think, "He didn't hit her, did he?" Like, and I
That.
would have said, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did he put his hands on you?" And I say too, there were other times, and the book really focuses on the physical abuse, but there were other times when you can clearly tell he had anger issues. The way he reacted at the restaurant with Atlas the very first time, absolutely uncalled for. First of all, they had just begun dating. And I understand you found her in the room, you're angry. You can be angry, but there are different ways to react when you're angry.
Yes.
And if you're so angry that someone is scared of you in that moment, then there's a problem. You're the problem. But
Yeah.
there were other moments he would slam doors and he would hit and throw stuff. And there are other things we breeze past in this, but that's all part of it. It slowly escalates to the physical violence. It normally doesn't just jump head in first. So those are
Mhm.
sort of things I wish we would have, like, when once she realized, I wish she would have almost like went back and did like a play by play of every moment that went wrong. That would have been really neat to see and really educational.
And I do want to also talk about the chapter that goes back to where she has the flashback of the instance, which is really the first physical altercation we get between the dad and the mom, where the dad is choking the mom out in the driveway, basically, because the mom parked in the garage to unload groceries.
Listen, when that scene came up, and when as a child, she said, "What kind of man would make his wife park in the driveway so he can park in the garage?" And I was like,
Hmm.
"Boom. That's the question, babe. You're there. We're there." I don't know.
Hmm.
You like, that's it. And then I love later on when she talks about, like, she starts to make excuses for Ryle. And she's like, "He would never make me park out in the driveway while he gets to the garage." And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
"No, but he shoved you down the stairs, Lily." Like,
No, but I think because she grew up in that situation, it was hard for her. She only saw the instances that made her dad angry. So to her, because Ryle was being angry about this, well, my dad never got angry about something like that. So maybe that's not,
she was
what
trying,
I'm
she
seeing.
kept, like, beating herself up for comparing them, and I was like,
Yes.
it's a pretty good comparison. I don't know why we're beating ourselves up for comparing it, but I think
Well, I
that's
think
also,
she was not comparing the right things. I think she was comparing the events rather than the behavior
Principle.
towards the events.
Well, and I don't think it's even mentioned by her at all, but there's a scene she talks about where her dad which it's the assault scene, but her dad gets jealous of a guy, and then the way Ryle acted in the restaurant, perfect
Yes.
comparison, and it never
Yes.
once crossed her mind, and I was like, "Man, okay, dang it, we're gonna miss that one," but, like, it was just crazy.
Well, and so she ends up having the dinner with her mom and Ryle, and in that
That was a
scene,
red
we
for me.
get well, yes, but I also feel like in some aspect that was kind of okay. I mean, at some point they're gonna have to meet at some point,
Yes, but
and
they weren't
with her
even
mom being
boyfriend and
such a
girlfriend at that time. And it wasn't her
no.
suggestion. He invited himself to dinner with her mother. I didn't like that.
The part that bothered me about that whole thing was Alyssa's reaction beforehand, because she mentions that she's going to dinner with Ryle and her mom, and Alyssa just doesn't seem happy about it. Like, she specifically mentions how unhappy Alyssa looked about it, and she thought about questioning her and just decided against it. And so that's where I'm related back, where maybe some events had happened in the past that she's just like, "Ooh, I don't know if they need to be getting this serious." And that's why she looked unhappy, because I couldn't think of any other reason why she would be unhappy that her brother's going to meet somebody's parents, especially when he's never had a serious relationship
I
before.
agree. I
But
definitely think that's the case.
I think there's one or two other instances that she seemed unhappy by something with their relation and just like general relationship stuff, not related to bruises or anything like
It's
that.
weird though because she does that in multiple scenes and then all of a sudden it flips and Alyssa's just
Yeah.
super happy about it. And no one ever told us why. And I agree, the
But I
only
think
explanation would be her concern for Lilly.
Well, I think there was a script flip whenever she gets told about Ryle's behavior, like why it may be occurring, the whole situation with his brother. I felt like that was where the scene flipped with her. And she felt that everything was cured because she knew his background. Then they're cooking at one point, and he takes the. I don't really know what the events were because it felt really rushed all of a sudden. But did she grab the pan without pot holders? Is that what
So
happened?
he grabbed the pan without pot holders.
Oh, okay,
And
okay. And so then he burned his
she
hands.
says, "Oh, Ryle, you need pot holders." And as she says that, he realizes, drops it. The thing breaks and it burns his hand. And then he has it under the sink in the water. And she's wine drunk, obviously, and is giggling because she's like, "Did that really just happen?" And here's where I get confused, okay? Because later in the book, it talks about he slapped her. Except
Yeah.
in the scene, what it describes her experiencing is weight into her. She hits her head, lands on the ground, and then there's weight on top of her. So I at first didn't realize it was a slap. I thought he tackled her off of the counter. Because how do you
So what
slap somebody and then land up on top of them on the ground?
so what I pictured is whenever he had the pan in his hand, he drops it because he realizes his hand's getting burnt. He like goes to turn around to the sink and accidentally hits her in the
Oh
face.
no.
See, and that's what I read it as at first because I thought, oh, well, maybe it is an accident. And he accidentally hit her, and she's just gonna have this flashback of like, oh, my dad's situation. So she just reacts badly to it, thinking that he's hitting her. I just imagine that he hit her as he's turning around to go to the sink because I imagine like, the sink in the island for some reason. And so the stove sink turn around hits her because she's standing here.
I know. So he drops the pan and goes to put his hand out of the water. And then because
Hmm.
she's giggling and laughing, that's when he attacked her.
Oh,
So but
yeah.
it's described weird because she ends up on the ground. She hits her head on the way to the ground, which is where the mark is on her forehead. She ends up on the ground and he ends up on top of her somehow. Because then remember she shoves him off and that's when he cuts his
Yeah.
hand on the glass. So it doesn't make sense to me how he slapped her off the counter but then
Well,
landed on top of her.
I took that he was on top of her as him all of a sudden being like, "Oh my god, I did that," and then putting a towel or something to her head to stop the bleeding or
Oh,
whatever.
I didn't
That's
read
what
it that
I
way. I read it as cuz she doesn't fully in that scene. I don't ever think she says slapped. She used the word slapped later on in the book when she was recounting the
yeah,
incidents, but she says all of a sudden I'm going down. She hits her head on something on the way down and then she hits the ground and there's a weight on top of her. So I didn't
gotcha.
understand how, which I'm not saying you can't. He could have slapped her and then tackled her, whatever. But the way it's written is confusing to me. Regardless, he knocked her down into the ground. busted her head, and then proceeds to get mad at her when his hand gets sliced open.
Yeah. Well, and
And then
then
that's when she's in the bed and they have sex, and
yeah.
she's literally still covered in his blood and her blood, but he doesn't check her for a concussion. He doesn't do any of that at that point. That's later on with the stair incident. And then she's in the bathroom, and that was, I think, probably one of the saddest moments for me, when she's standing in the mirror and trying to convince herself it was an accident. That broke my heart.
Yeah, and I think that when I first read it, I read it wrong. To me, it was just like he accidentally hit her and she just like all of a sudden had a flashback. So then when she went to the bathroom, it made sense. She was like, it was just an accident. Don't overreact. He's not your father. To me, I read it as an accident. And then she had that reaction, I guess is the best way of saying it.
Gotcha.
I could have read it wrong, but that's just how I read it. Then after all of that happens, she ends up finding out that Atlas is the owner and of the
Called
restaurant.
Bibs, which is better.
Yes, yes.
I love
And
Atlas.
she ends up talking to Atlas in the bathroom. And I just knew as soon as they went into the bathroom that Ryle was going to be standing outside the bathroom. But he tries to convince her to leave Ryle because he sees the bruises. And she's like, oh, no, an excuse. And what broke my heart was whenever he made the comment, you sound just like your mother.
Oh,
That hurt me because at the time I really was just like, oh, it was an accident. But also when they're sitting there at that family dinner and he covers for it and says, oh, she just had an accident. Right then I backtracked and I was like, maybe it wasn't an accident.
yeah.
Maybe it really was something. Because why lie about it if it really was an accident?
Yep. Well, and I don't think you
So,
end up with a contusion on your head just from accidentally being whacked backwards as someone's moving with their hands in the air.
unless he went around with some force. I don't know. She's tipsy. I just imagined her not really having good balance and
Well,
just
and
he went
that
in.
also hurt my feelings reading that, because she was talking about no more vintage wine for me, blaming herself. And I was just like,
Yeah.
girl, he hit you. It's not your fault. But obviously, again,
Yeah.
that is the cycle.
Yeah, and then we have the scene where Atlas comes to the shop and he gives her a book he had gotten signed by Ellen.
He comes
And
to apologize, though, for saying that you sound like your mother.
yeah, I really did enjoy that he was like, hey, you say this is not happening. And just for my state of mind, because I know your past, let me give you my number. You slip it between your phone case just to be safe. And it, to me, somebody in that situation, Atlas is the person you need.
Yep.
No matter how many times you tell somebody you need to leave, this is a bad situation, they're not. He tried that and then he was like, you know what, backtrack. You just call me when you're ready to admit that this is what's happening. And I think that's the perfect way because no matter what, if somebody leaves a domestic violence situation, they're always going to have that backtrack that happens of, oh, well, maybe he wasn't that bad, or I did say this at the time that it happened. So if I go back, I'll take whatever I get and it'll be fine. And I think Atlas giving her the door to open, I think that really said a lot about him, but also it's the only way that somebody's going to be comfortable enough to leave a domestic violence situation is if they feel that the person they're going to is leaving it open to them to leave rather than forcing them to leave.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, and here's the thing. Most people do not leave the
no.
vast majority do not leave the first time. And it wouldn't be a cycle if they did. It would be broken. So, when a victim of domestic violence actually decides to leave, it is the most dangerous time for the cycle.
Yeah. Then we get into the part where Atlas is beat up by the dad. So Atlas was Lily's first, and
It's
the
so
dad
cute.
ends
I
up
love that
walking
for him.
in, which to me, so a lot of their relationship was very sweet and innocent. He was really cold in the house and she let him come in. But
The scene where she washes his blankets, she absolutely wanted to sleep in the same bed as him, which is hilarious and so innocent because it wasn't even sexual. She just wanted to sleep in the same bed as him. It was the cutest thing. But also, I will say, talking about him being her first, when Ryle at the restaurant said, "This is Atlas, the homeless guy you pity effed." The very
yeah,
first time I read that, my jaw dropped. And I was like,
yeah.
he did not just say that. And in every book that I read, I try to picture how I would react to something and what I would do, and that would have me speechless. I was like, "Did he really just say that?" I was shook.
I'm going to be honest, I probably would have slapped him. Been like, that is not what I said at
It
all.
was crazy. And
It,
but then when
that
Atlas
scene.
says, "Don't worry, Lily, I was there. I know it wasn't." I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, okay." So, it was good.
Well, and then Ryle ends up trying to beat up Atlas in the restaurant.
Oh,
And
check.
they end up leaving, and Alyssa and her, a couple chapters later, end up sitting in their bedroom having girl chat. And I feel like Alyssa helped trap her a little bit in the scene. And she's asking her, if Ryle asked you to marry him today, would you marry him? And she's like, yeah, I would totally. Like, the moment he asked, like, let's go. And he's in the doorway overhearing this whole entire conversation. He's like, okay, well, I'm booking a plane right now. Let's go get married. And I don't know, it did not sit well with me.
I did
It
love
was
his
probably that was
I loved his little comment, "I'd marry the hell out of you." I
yeah.
liked that part of it, but I wanted it to end there. I didn't actually want them to go get married.
Yeah. I feel like if Alyssa knew what was going on, she probably would not have suggested any of that. But I think she was also trying to give him the benefit of the doubt just the same as Lily was. So I think that she trapped her into it a little bit, but I also think that she had good intentions with it. But I don't think she planned on him all of a sudden just booking a flight and flying her out to Vegas and getting her married with her. So it
No, I
just,
think she was
I don't
just trying
know.
to move him along to the next stage, but I don't think she thought they would go get eloped right then.
Yeah.
And her mom in the middle of the night and put them on a flight. My mom would beat me. Mom would say, "No, I'm going back to bed and we will plan this in 3 days if that's what you want to do. But I'm going back to sleep."
Can we talk about the fact that how much money that probably cost them though to literally book a flight in the middle of the night to fly to Las Vegas to get married?
Can we talk about the fact that he moved in with her for a long time on her income in her apartment? It's never talked about if he ever paid for anything. And then he all of a sudden he books this flight and takes off, and then he buys this apartment and spending all this money. And I'm just thinking, where was all that money 6 weeks ago, baby, when you moved into the apartment? Were
Yes.
you splitting rent? Or like
Yeah.
what was happening here? I need to know. That
Need the deets.
the speed with which he moved in really bothered me too. That was a red flag for me too.
Yeah, especially with them taking it
Yeah.
slow, it didn't really feel like it
It
was
wasn't taking it
as
slow.
slow as yeah, it was almost like slow rushed.
Yeah.
Like
Like, it was the
I
first
think
2 or
honestly
3
by
weeks,
week
it might have been slow, and then we jumped in
yes.
head first.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about how he finds Atlas's phone number because it also confused me. Unless you were snooping, how in the world did that phone cover
Oh, he
fall
was
off?
absolutely snooping, but I will say, babe, I love that she memorized it. I love her for that.
Yes. Yes.
That I was like,
And I think deep down at that point, if you took the time to memorize that, you knew deep
yeah,
down something was going
yeah.
on. Like
You weren't
there's
ready
no
to
doubt about
accept it, but you knew one day
it.
you were
Yes.
gonna need it. Also,
Yes.
I love though that Atlas and her didn't really have that long of a relationship, nor really that deep of one. I mean, they did fall in love. It talks about like childhood love, and don't get me wrong, I love the next book and I'd love to get to see their love story. But the connection that you have to have with someone to trust them enough to think if I end up in this life or death situation, that's who I'm going to call. I love that for her that she had somebody, and then that it was Atlas, obviously, but that she had somebody like that because it's very clear. And there, again, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry if this is very scattered. We get very into this one, but there's a scene. It's where the big incident happens, and she's crawling out of bed, and she's thinking about who can she call, and she talks about, I can't call my mom. I can't disappoint her like that. And I can't call Alyssa because that's his sister. And I don't want to tell her these things. And then she has Atlas, and that's who she calls. And I cannot tell you how much I love that for her because there's so many victims that don't have that person that they can call. Then the fact that she memorized his number above all else.
Well, and then we have the scene where he shoves her down the stairs and gaslights her that that event did not happen. And she does kick him out. So kudos to her because previously she had let him stick around. To me, that scene really ticked me off because he was gaslighting her and almost gaslighting himself to believe that that's what happened as well, that he didn't shove her. She just fell.
Yeah,
But we know that she didn't accidentally fall in the kitchen either. So I don't know. I don't want to get too far into it because it makes me angry when I think about
me
it.
too.
But I just personally feel like to over exaggerate to the point where you shoved your loved one downstairs over her having a hidden phone number. I'm sorry. If she was cheating on you, her loss. Like, move on, get over it, forgive her, whatever you want to do, but don't freaking shove somebody down a staircase because you get angry that she has a hidden phone number.
Listen, and
Nothing should ever be that
no,
serious.
and she says that it's the last incident she brings it up, but she says to him later on when they're discussing the incident that even if you had caught me in bed with him, it doesn't matter. There is no excuse for that ever to happen. He literally had to check her for a concussion. Like, that's how bad it was.
Mhm.
And then it's never quite pinpointed when she actually became pregnant. And so I always wonder, like, if there was ever a chance that, like, she was in the very, very early stages when the stair scene happened or not. I don't remember the timeline, though, so it
Yeah.
might not be, but I just always wondered that.
Yeah, I don't think they ever had like a pinpoint time period, but it had to been somewhere around that scene for sure, whether it was before or whether it was after, but it definitely had to be around that time for sure. We end up finding out then after she kicks him out, he shows up at the flower shop where Alyssa's already working, and she comes in and Alyssa tells her, "You've got to listen to his story. This will help explain." He explains that the reason why he reacted so strongly in the first scene was that he had previously grabbed his father's gun and had killed his brother, which, to be honest, outside of the whole domestic violence situation, whenever he described that he tried to put his brother's brains back together, that broke me. I could not imagine witnessing that, and I get that's also its own severity situation. Gun violence is a huge thing, and especially whenever you are not keeping your guns safe, if you are going to have them, you should keep it locked up. You should not
I
let your
agree.
children have access to that. And his brother, and I don't know if Alyssa was personally there or not, but I don't remember the
I think
mention of
she
her being
is.
present.
I think they both are.
I just remember him saying that he yelled for hours, or what felt like hours, in the garage for help,
I think
and
she went and
eventually,
got help, and I think he says he stood there staring, I think, for some time.
well, she doesn't seem to,
She was younger, I don't
which
think
I
she
mean,
remembers.
yeah, and I think it scarred him a lot more than it did
Well, she didn't pull
her.
the trigger, so that might have to do
Well,
it.
yes, that too. But I mean, also seeing one brother kill the other brother, I think it would be pretty
I
traumatic.
agree. Say, though,
But I do,
I have sympathy for him for the incident that occurred. Absolutely. And
yes.
again, like we talked about, it's hard sometimes to hear the villain's backstory because it makes him seem not so villainous. However, I wish it would have been better explained how that connected to his angry outburst that led him to shove
Hmm.
Lily downstairs. And I'm going to keep talking about that because I can't get over it. But doesn't seem to correlate for me that he blacks out and shoves her down the stairs. Blacking out in general, maybe, but even then, he doesn't describe anger as the incident. So anger shouldn't be a trigger if you think about it. So I don't know. I need more of a description of that for it to make more sense to me. Also, go to
Well, and
counsel.
yes.
Go to anger management. Do something about it. The first time he accidentally hit her, if he loved her, he would have gotten treatment. And you'll notice even in
Yeah.
the next book,
Yeah.
he doesn't get treatment there either.
Well, and I doubt he was like, "Hey, I shoved her down the stairs last
Yeah,
night."
I
I
doubt that.
think he didn't give that story. So I think she just thought, "Oh, he had an angry outburst," and she ghosted him
Yeah.
basically, is what I feel like the story she got was. So again, I don't feel like she got the full thing until it seems that whenever Lily finally admits to her what happened, she says, "Man, I would have never pushed you towards him if I knew this was the case."
Yeah.
So I don't think she ever knew the full extent of what it was.
But it's from Lily's point of view, if Alyssa doesn't ask and doesn't push
Yes.
and is not curious, then it's hard to know whether or not she does know that. So I'm sure from Lily's point of view, she probably thought she knew some of it. She probably thought she knew or wondered if she knew. But it's also Lily doesn't want to ruin Alyssa's version of her brother. She kept coming back to that. I'm not trying to interfere in that relationship or other things like that that aren't Lily's responsibility, but she was taking them on.
Well, I also feel like it's kind of the situation where she doesn't want to go to her mother because she's afraid her mother's going to be like, "Oh, I lived through this, it's fine."
Yeah, we
Kind
see
of
that
like,
later on for sure.
yeah, and I could understand, especially his sibling could be like, I don't know if they're going to take my side over his side
Yeah.
because they grew up together. They have a tighter bond. So
Yeah.
I could completely understand where that's the case, but
It made total sense to me because you don't know. And you run that
yeah.
risk sometimes that you do tell somebody the truth and then they call you a liar. And that obviously doesn't help the cycle and just puts you back in a headspace of where it's your fault, you're the problem. And then that just allows the abuse to occur again and again.
Or they could gaslight the situation too and be like, "Well, you don't remember it right. My brother told me this story. He wouldn't do something like that." That reaction, I think, would totally put her further into the
Yep,
cycle.
I agree.
So then we end up finding out that for basically his apology, he buys an entire apartment in the same building as Alyssa.
Without, this is again red flag, and she says it. I feel like this is something we should have done together, and it just breezes past it. But
Yes.
I hate that.
And to me, what makes it worse is this man had a lot of money.
A lot
So
of money, evidently.
what made it worse is I feel like he kept trying to up himself to a point where he was just like, "Oh, well, you're not going to want to leave me because I bought this,
You're reliant upon
I
me. Yep.
yes." And first it was, "Oh, I bought you basically a plane to fly over and get married. So, there's this flashy thing I got you, and now I've got you this fancy new apartment." I feel like there is some instances where that becomes a big thing. And she spoke about it. It was very similar with her mother. Her mother was not the breadwinner, so she couldn't leave because she couldn't afford to leave.
Yep.
It's very much that instance that happens so often, that women are unable to leave because the man is the breadwinner or controls the money, even in some situations.
Yep.
I get it and I understand that.
Well, and again, it's a later scene, and I'll probably read the direct quote later. But the scene where her mom tells her how it escalated, and then the fourth incident, he only slapped her, and she thought to herself, like, it was almost like,
At least it wasn't this
yeah,
bad.
like it was almost relief that it was just a slap, it wasn't a beating. And oh my gosh, that just broke my heart.
Yeah, but that's often how at times people in domestic violence situations justify the situation. And then, okay, it was bad, but at least the beating came, and now the next couple weeks are going to be fine because he's going to try to make it up to me. We talked about earlier in a entirely separate conversation outside of this that you have to have the boundaries and the limitation. So once you reach that limitation, it shouldn't go any further. And I think even Lilly mentions my mom kept pushing that boundary
Yeah, that's
lines
the quote
of
I was talking about. I want to read. So she
go
says,
for it.
I know exactly what you mean, Lily, but the last thing you want to do is lose sight of your limit. Please don't allow that to happen. We all have a limit, what we're willing to put up with before we break. When I married your father, I knew exactly what my limit was, but slowly, with every incident, my limit was pushed a little more. The first time your father hit me, he was immediately sorry. He swore it would never happen again. The second time he hit me, he was even more sorry. The third time it happened, it was more than a hit. It was a beating. And every single time, I took him back. But the fourth time, it was only a slap. And when that happened, I felt relieved. I remember thinking, at least he didn't beat me this time. That wasn't so bad. Every incident chips away at your limit. Every time you choose to stay, it makes the next time that much harder to leave. And eventually, you lose sight of your limit altogether because you start to think, I've lasted 5 years now. What's 5 more? Don't be like me, Lily. I know that you believe he loves you, and I'm sure he does, but he's not loving you the right way. He doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved. If he truly loved you, he wouldn't allow you to take him back. He would make the decision to leave you himself so that he knows for a fact he would never hurt you again. That's the kind of love a woman deserves, Lily. I've never heard it described that way, though, honestly, like the limit of what you're willing to take. Before this book, I had never heard it that way. So that's an interesting take on it. But even more so, the fourth time it was a slap and I felt relieved is absolutely awful and gutted me. But then the next line where it talks about, I've lasted 5 years now. What's 5 more?
Mm-hmm.
Golly.
Yeah.
And I keep using the word victim, but I really should probably use the word survivor. I actually prefer that word.
So then we get to the scene where Ryle finds all of the journals that Lily has been writing to Ellen. And
Again, snooping.
yes. Wait, to be honest, I don't know exactly how he could have gotten, I don't know, so smart. I don't really know how to say it, but to connect the magnet to the news article, to then connect it to, I
I
gotta
think he
snoop
might
to
have
find her
secretly been
journals.
reading her journals the whole time.
You think so?
I think it happened more than just that last night. I don't know if he finally got to the last one that last night, but I think he read, there's no way he read all of them in that one night. And it wasn't the same entry that talks about all of the stuff he supposedly knew about. So I think that, yeah, I think he might have been snooping the whole time.
Well, because she had read the last journal, so I thought maybe she just laid it on the top of the box, and so when he opened the box, it was the first one there, and that's how he
Maybe.
read the first one. But that's how I got to the connection, I guess, that he maybe found that out because the magnet was talked about in the last journal because he had come back from Boston and brought her it.
But
So
the
I
heart tattoo wasn't. That's the one that got me that I thought maybe he read earlier because the heart tattoo was something. Remember, he carved the from the tree or whatever, and then
yeah.
he kissed that spot on her in multiple entries. So
Well, I thought it was more so like he knew that was a spot that she had been kissed at, not per se that there was a heart there, but he knew that that was the spot she'd been kissed at, and then she got a heart there, so then she had a branding of where he kissed her at.
I thought he said
That's what
my
I took
I
from
thought he
that.
said my favorite spot on you, and I thought he meant the heart, but maybe he just meant in general her more body,
I
not
took it as just a
heart.
general, I thought this was my spot, but turns out it was his spot that you end up getting marked to mark his relationship with you or
But
something like that.
how would he have known that without reading more of the journals?
She mentioned it within multiple entries in the journal about him kissing her there
But was it
and that
just
she
the
loved that
last book?
spot.
Was it even in the last book? It's hard to tell what book is what book though for me with the journals. Like
Yeah,
it's kind of all connected almost in my head. But
because I'm sure there's multiple entries we didn't read either. So,
yeah, absolutely. She
because I
says
mean,
there's
there's no
like
way.
9 journals or 16
Yeah,
journals. Like there's a lot of journals. So,
yeah. So, I mean, that to me,
but I do agree. It kind of seems really rushed into him all of a sudden understanding a lot of things. And how did he understand any of it?
yeah. And to me, to correlate a magnet that says better in Boston that you could have just got by visiting Boston with his restaurant name was a lot of dots
I mean,
that I
she didn't
feel
even
like,
realize that Bibbs was Bibbs until that
no.
newspaper, and then she realized what Bibbs stood for. So if she didn't even catch on, how would he have?
Yeah, there was a lot with that just, I
Okay,
don't
but
know.
listen, when he asked her where the magnet was from, I did say to myself, just tell him.
Yeah.
And not that that's
I
any
think
excuse for what happened next. I'm not saying that at all. But I do wonder how it would have played out if she had just told him. But then again, that's also part
I
of
think it would
the
have
blame for
I
all.
think it would have escalated the situation to a sooner point, to be honest. I think at that point, no matter what she said, he was drunk. And on top of that, he had already had his own
He already
train
made his
that had
assumption.
been,
Yeah, his assumption. Yeah.
yeah. And so he had already come up with his own for everything. So I think no matter what she said, he was going to stick to his version of what he thought had happened. And I just think if she would have admitted, he probably would have hit her right then and there rather than kind of stall it out a little bit, which I don't know if that would have been any better or worse, to be honest. But to me, what really bothered me was in this scene he does try to force sexual content onto her, and the fact that she had to headbutt him to get him to stop. I've never been in that type of situation, so I can't personally speak to the experience, but to sit there and this person is somebody you've trusted with yourself, your mind, your body, everything, and then they go betray you like that, I feel like that would take it to a whole nother level. I couldn't imagine. And to know that she had experienced her father do that to her mother in one of the scenes, she also talks about that, and to experience that, and she almost tried to kill her father in that scene, and Atlas actually had stopped her, to me just broke my heart too, because she even mentions that it was almost like replaying the scene in her head. And I think at that point is whenever it finally did hit her that I am in the same situation my mother was in. I hate that it got to that extent that she finally realized that, but I think that really was her breaking point of finally realizing that. And honestly, I think if he hadn't have tried to force her, I think she probably would have stayed. I hate to say that, but I think she probably would have still continued to make excuses. And until she saw that scene where she felt that anger that she felt towards her father, I think that's the only reason why she decided to leave.
I agree. And again, not that anything's worse or better or anything like that, because it's all awful. But
Yes.
the way that she describes how he sunk his teeth into her like an animal, and so bad that we later find out that she has scars from it, really messed with me too. Because I don't think there's ever been a single thing in this entire world that I've thought, what I'm going to do is sink my teeth into that until it literally leaves scars, much less on the person that I claim to love. And I don't know if people realize how powerful you have to bite to make scars, but it's pretty bad. You have to break skin with your teeth, and your teeth are not meant to break skin. So it's pretty bad. And then he had butted her when she was fighting back on the bed. And then to know that she is hurting here, skin is broken, she's bleeding, she's got a concussion now, we learn. She's bleeding from the contusion there. And then he proceeds to try to do that. Just the whole escalation of the entire situation, it was very hard to read for me. And
Yeah.
I agree. I hate that that's what it had to come to for her to leave, but I do think that the parallel to what she witnessed for her mother and how that made her feel for her mother is what actually got her the power and the strength to actually go on.
And I really love that when Atlas showed up, he instantly was like, let me go in there and show him. And she's like, no, no, no. And he's like, no, really, let me in there. Because, I mean, they hadn't seen each other for years at this point. So
Yeah.
to know that he is such an advocate for her as a victim and just like, I will stand up for you because nobody else is, love that. Love that so
I love
much.
it even more that great example, even though he's so angry that he wants to go in there and beat that man up and teach him a lesson, when she says, "Please don't, I need you," he puts his anger aside and takes her out and walks out with
Yes.
her and doesn't do it. If that doesn't show you what a good man, I don't know what does. I wouldn't have. I'd have said, "You sit right here for just a moment. I'm gonna go kill him, and then we'll go to the hospital." I was very, very impressed with Atlas in that scene.
Well, and she ends up finding out she's pregnant, which to me, I think she grieved rather than be excited. Because, I mean, you imagine whenever you find out you're pregnant, you would be excited and all that kind of stuff. And instead, it was almost like a grievance moment. She was like, oh my God, I've literally done the same thing that my mom did. And it even worsens, I think, the situation for her rather than make it something exciting, which I hate that. Somebody who had looked forward to breaking the cycle, having a family of her own, had to have that realization that she's back to that same place. I hate that for her.
See,
And I
and
hate
I
Ralph
think
for doing that to her.
I was gonna say, and if I was her, I don't think there would ever be any coming back from that for me for Ryle, because I would hate him for the rest of our lives that he put me in that situation, that he caused
Yes.
that, and he broke the promise that I made to myself. I would hate him for the rest of my life. And I'd probably be bitter because I'm a bitter person, but she was not. So kudos to her. And I agree. I think it totally tainted the entire experience for her. And I hate that because she actually wanted to be a mother. And then her first time being a mother and it's ruined because he literally can't keep his hands to himself is
Yeah.
just is so heartbreaking.
Yeah, I personally don't want children, but even in that moment, I can sympathize with her. The fact that it was a complete, almost a letdown that that situation had happened,
It's
and
almost
so
like your
I
worst
really do feel
nightmare.
for her.
Like,
Yes,
that's how I would describe it.
yes. And to me, what honestly made the scenes worse after was whenever he basically shows up at the flower shop, like, hey, here's the keys. You get my apartment. I paid for everything. It's still like a level of control to
Mhm.
me that
Yep.
he's like, hey, I'm not going to be around. I'm going to give you your space so we can get back together whenever I get back. But I've paid all your bills, so you don't have to worry about all that. Like, I've got you. I'm still here for you. I didn't mean any of it. In my mind, by doing that, still try to justify his behavior,
Yep.
and she still kind of allowed him by moving back in too.
But
I know
even
that
after
sounds really
that,
bad.
when he finally gets back, there are several times that she allows him to cross boundaries, and we kind of see that play into the beginning of It Starts With Us, so we can get more into that
Yes.
later, but definitely we do see that there are not healthy boundaries being set and that he is still striving for that some sort of level of control, and you have to cut it off.
Yes. And I think, once she gets to Alice's house, I really do enjoy this poker scene
I
because
do. It's
to
so
me,
cute.
first of all, she basically naked truths these guys and was just like, hey, I'm being abused. Atlas saved me. Let's play poker. And I appreciate that she's able to separate her grief because, I mean, that's really what it is. She's grieving the loss of this relationship and what it's cost her and what her future child is going to have to possibly experience. So it is a level of grief in a way.
Yeah.
So I love that she's able to separate that for the night, and really all of Atlas's friends, I love them. We love them. They're just so supportive. And I feel like after one night of poker, they were ready to go to battle for her too, just the same as Atlas. So I loved that so much. And I
Yeah.
don't know, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I like we get to see a happy ever after with Lilly and Atlas. Spoiler alert. But I also love getting to see other male characters that are good men too.
Yes.
And one of the ones we haven't really talked about is Marshall. Marshall is
Mhm.
such a good husband to Alyssa, and I love
Yes.
that we get to see that parallel alongside Ryle as well throughout the whole book. And it's not really talked about, and even Lily doesn't mention how good he is to her or anything like that, I don't think. But I wish it would have been hinted more.
Well, is
Not
Kyle's
that
like childhood best friend.
Yes, and so that I feel like he had to have known something as well. And Marshall comes in the room so that there's a third party present and things like that for incidents. So it was a little weird. I just thought like I would have liked to learn a little bit more about that. But also,
I feel like Marshall did that though because Lily asked Alyssa, "Can you be a part of this?" Or Alyssa said, "Lily's going to go do this. Can
well,
you
the
just
first time
stand
Ryle
by?"
actually asked him, he said, "I brought him here for you, not for me."
Yeah.
But when he showed up and he wasn't supposed to be there yet, which I didn't like that either. I felt like that was controlling and manipulative on purpose. But anyways, also, not that I'm saying you need to be praised because you're a good guy. That's supposed to be the default. Like, do better, most of
Yes.
you. But also at the same time, I wish that parallel would have been played on a little bit more so that we could actually see a really good difference between those two as we progress.
Well, and I feel like Marshall, which just kind of side note to this entire thing, I kind of find it weird that so many people were willing to basically throw Ryle out the window and be like, Lily, you are the person we're worried about. And even before they find out she was pregnant. So that's why I think there had to been some instances in the past.
I agree. You cannot convince me that there wasn't at least one drunken incident at a bar that Marshall witnessed. You cannot.
Yeah.
There's no way that he got so mad at her that he pushed her down a flight of stairs, but he's never swung on a man in a bar. It's not
Yeah.
possible. That's not possible.
Well, and to me, if he's so quick to force himself on Lily, I also feel like maybe there should have been an instance where he maybe groped a woman or something in the past that was a little inappropriate.
I
And I
think
mean,
he thought the intimacy of sex, he could use that almost like as an apology,
yes. Yeah, I get
which
that.
obviously is
Yeah.
wrong. That's wrong.
Yes.
Don't
Well,
get me
especially
that's wrong.
when she's begging you no.
Correct. No is a complete sentence. But I'm just saying
Yeah.
I think that was his purpose. I don't think it was a typical sexual assault would be. I think it was more of this is the only way I know how to apologize and make you feel better. But obviously it
Yeah.
was crap.
Well, and whenever Lily admits everything to Alyssa, I really appreciate that Alyssa was able to separate her feelings from sister and friend.
I agree.
I'm going to be honest, and nothing against Colleen Hoover. I do think this book set up kind of an imagery of, oh, so many people are on the victim's side. And
Yeah,
that
which
was
is
kind of the
not
problem.
typical.
Yeah, and that was kind of a problem I had. I love it because I would hope that somebody in that situation would have that many people there for them. 99.9% of the time, that is not what happens. People don't have people in their corners, or some people give up on other people because they're just tired of hearing that they've gone back and they're getting abused again. And
Well, I
I mean,
think
oftentimes they end up in a shelter by themselves
yeah,
running.
well, I was gonna say, I think one aspect of domestic violence that's not really talked about in this book is the isolation factor. And that typically is what happens is they are isolated from their friends and family, and so then their support system has fallen apart. So I think that was the difference with this situation. And again, like she says in the book, like we've said, every situation is different. Every aspect,
Yes.
there might be missing factors, there might not be, there might be new ones. There's all kinds of ways to abuse someone, unfortunately. But I think that is something I agree that most often they are isolated, and in this book she wasn't. So it was a different sort of situation than we normally see.
Well, and I feel like it could have hit more home or more realistic if that was the case. I love that for Lily, she did have that. That is great. But like Lily's perspective towards her mother, not wanting to tell her about a lot of this is what happens. A lot are ashamed or embarrassed that this happened. They blame themselves for their husbands lashing out or whatever.
Yes.
So they don't want to tell other people.
I think too,
Sometimes even,
I think you're right that we definitely missed that point. I think it would have been a good idea to maybe show both sides and to maybe show that side of Lily's mom. We get it in
yes.
hints of keeping secrets and stuff, but I think it would have been even better to highlight that Lily's mom didn't actually have any friends. She worked at the school for 30 years, but she didn't actually have friends. Nobody really knew her, or things like that. So we could have seen both sides.
It is mentioned at some point that she was only allowed to go to parties that her father attended or something along that lines, because I
Yeah,
think it
there's
was
some
after
hint of
that
that.
was whenever she ends up getting forced upon because he thinks that she's flirting with some other
Flirting.
guy. But it's oftentimes like that
Which, you know
that
what? If she
happens.
was, I wouldn't blame her. But anyway, sorry.
I doubt she would, because she knew what would follow.
Absolutely,
So
she would not have, she would be petrified. But
yeah,
if she had been, who would blame her?
no one. So I do want to talk about briefly that when Ryle returns home, I feel like instantly he was just like, "Oh, I've been away. I've given you time to think. All is forgiven." It rubbed me real wrong.
I agree.
I was just like, no time or distance is ever gonna forget, especially the imagery of your husband over you forcing himself on you. So I don't know why in the world he would ever think that that would just instantly be like, oh, I could kiss you and we're all good now that I've disappeared for 3 months,
Well,
2 months.
and she almost goes with it until things happen, like he grabs her hair and it gives her flashback, and other
Triggers.
things that
Yeah.
he does and it gives her flashback, and she kind of realizes at that point it's never going to be the same again. And he doesn't, obviously, because he's ignorant and continues to live in la la land as if he's not a horrible person, which, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, he says that people are not inherently good or evil, but that they just make bad choices. And I actually disagree with that. If you will put your hands on the person you claim to love, you are a bad person. I don't care what
Mhm.
anybody says. Now, there are good people that make bad decisions, and there are some bad people that sometimes do good things. I agree with that. But there are certain people who are just bad, and you can change that. I'm not saying you can't maybe fix yourself and come back from it, but you got to take some responsibility, babe. You shoved your woman down the stairs. You are not an okay person.
Well, and me personally, I feel like each person is presented with a good choice and a bad choice. It's up to you whether you decide to do it. But I think there's a certain amount of choices or certain type of choices that are bad that makes you a bad person. So obviously, killing somebody is a bad thing that makes you a bad person.
I I think that context is important too, so that matters too. But yes,
Yes.
there are obviously certain things you cannot come back from. Even if you did it in self defense, it still leaves something on your soul to the day that I die. If you can justify putting your hands on the person that you claim to love, you are not somebody I want to know.
Yes. Well, and I hate to reference Harry Potter in this, but whenever
How did we get to Harry Potter from domestic violence? Now
no,
that's a good one. Let's
well,
do this.
Well, because you were talking about how certain choices change a person. So whenever they're making the Horcruxes, I don't remember who exactly says it, but somebody says that every time that you kill somebody, it breaks off a piece of you that ends up becoming a Horcrux. So to me, it's the same way. Every time that you make a bad decision, it just chips away at one more piece of yourself. So to me, as a whole, it starts off good, and the choices that they're given and how they make those choices and those choices are what chips away at that person being classified as good or bad.
I agree.
And
And I do believe that there is redemption, and I do believe that you can rehabilitate and you can get better, but that is an active choice. And in this book, we do
yes.
not see that choice being made a single time. But that person has trusted you, that person has loved you, and you are abusing it, and you should be ashamed.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, I feel like this whole episode we've really just been ranting, but that's okay.
Well,
We
and
only cried
so then
once
we
so
go in.
far, so that's good.
I mean, it's good progress. So then we get to the point where she basically lays everything out to her mother, and that was a really emotional scene for me.
Yeah, same.
It really, I don't even know how to describe the emotions it brought up, but I wish she would have told her mother sooner,
I do too.
because knowing how she reacted, I feel like she could have possibly left sooner. But I'm gonna be honest. I want to kind of play devil's advocate here because I feel like her mom should have seen the signs in her. I feel like her mom was around enough that she saw the bruising, she saw kind of his possessiveness, she saw all this behaviors that I feel like she should have picked up on something and been like, "Hey, is something going on we need to talk about here or something?"
Well, and it's kind
That's
of
just me.
it's hinted that her mom does see her very often, but there's never an actual scene written where mom says, "How'd you get that bruise?" or "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" or none of that.
Yes.
Like, we never see any of those moments. And it's hard for me to believe that any mother would see their daughter with a contusion on their forehead and not say, "What happened?" So we don't even get to see a moment where Lily's allegedly lied to her mom either. So who knows really what happened in the background? Maybe mom was suspicious. We don't really know. But I kind of wish that we would have seen more of that, because I do agree that I believe if mom had seen these things, mom would have been like, "Now, Lily, tell me the truth. What's going on?" I agree.
Yes.
Especially because mom was impressed that he was a doctor. But that very first scene at dinner, when he just shows up at their dinner, she's not impressed. In fact, she's kind of like,
Mm-mm.
"Who are you and what are you doing?" When he's a
Yeah.
doctor, she's kind of like, "Oh, okay, maybe he is decent." But she's not that impressed at first. She slowly does get too impressed for me just because he's a doctor with money. That bothers me. But her husband was a mayor and he still acted like that. So
Yeah.
But anyways,
Well, so then we get to the baby shower. I call it a run in. And I still, again, feel like
I call it a
Ryle.
run in.
I mean, I do, because I still feel like Ryle, again, ruined a
A
moment for
perfectly good
her.
moment. Yep, I agree.
The whole entire time, she really even couldn't enjoy pregnancy, because the whole entire time she was thinking about, do I divorce this man or not, because of everything he put me through. And
The answer is yes, babe.
it just,
Get a good divorce lawyer. Get rid
it
of him.
is, yes. There's a couple instances after she leaves him that I wrote down. I'm really proud of her for what she says to him. And we find out, and it starts with us, that she has a list that she keeps, that she reads every time that she starts to doubt things.
Love that.
And yes. And so I feel like, because she was around him so much in these moments, that she didn't have to keep that list, because he still showed out basically. And so
Yeah.
she was able to see why she said no. Where in It Starts With Us, you kind of don't get that. So she kind of had that doubt creep in. So to me, I think that her admitting, hey, my focus is on this baby. Until this baby comes, we're not going to talk about this anymore. We're not going to try to get back together. We're just going to focus on the child. And I really appreciate that she stayed headstrong in that, and stayed with that for sure.
I agree, and I do think, and this is again, I'm gonna jump ahead. This is kind of the ending scene, but when she does finally decide that she is going to divorce him, and it's literally right after she gave birth, and he's holding their baby girl, and she says, "Ryle, I want a divorce." I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little bit of joy at that. I was like, "Stick it to him,"
Well, I kind of got a little nervous, because so
because he had the
she
girl.
had him where he was staying on the couch until her water breaks, basically. So I got a little skeptical then. I was like, "Ooh, she's letting him creep back in. I don't know how that's going to work out." And then when she says, "Oh, I'm going to name her after your brother," I was kind of like, "Ooh, okay. I don't think this is going to go where it needs to go." And I think it's the last line, basically before the epilogue. She's like, "I want a divorce." And I think it ultimately came down to, as soon as she looked at her daughter and she was like, "I have got to stop this, because now I've continued the cycle." That was such a powerful moment. And I know it was all internally, but I think it was such a powerful moment to admit that, hey, I've got to stop this,
I will
and to
say
stay
too,
headstrong in it.
absolutely, and to stay committed to it because a lot of people want to do
Yeah.
it and they decide to do it and then they don't follow through. So kudos to Lily because that's a very hard decision to make, and we don't want to make light of that at all. Also, I
No.
will say, as much as I hate Ryle, I was also really torn up when she puts it into the perspective that helps him better understand. And she talks about, what would you do if one of these days this little girl looked up at you and said, "Daddy, my boyfriend hit me"? What would you say to her, Ryle? And she gives him a few more examples. "He pushed me down the stairs. He said it was an accident. What do I do? He tried to rape me, Daddy. He held me down while I begged him to stop, but he swears he'll never do it again. What should I do, Dad?" And she's like, What would you tell her, Ryle? What Give me an answer. What would you tell her? And he says, "I would tell her that she is worth so much more, and I would beg her to not go back, no matter how much he loves her, because she's worth so much more." And I think what really frustrates me, though, is in that scene, he seems to understand, and then it starts with us,
Yes.
and he very clearly
I
doesn't
was fixing to say the
understand.
same thing.
Very clearly
I
does
was going to
not.
say the same thing.
So, and I will rant about that probably all through It Starts With Us. But I'm super proud of her for sticking with it because this is really the first time she did decide to leave. And like we talked about earlier, that's not common. It normally takes multiple time until you're finally ready. And that
And I do think, in a sense, she did try to leave a couple times, but
I think she
she always
thought
ended
about
up.
it. But
Yeah, it wasn't like active steps. It was more so, "Hey, I'm not going to talk to you because you did this to me." And then he creeps back in, kind of thing. So I think, in a sense, for a book purpose, there was a sense of leaving, but in actual real world, it wasn't
yeah.
that kind of aspect.
Well, and I want to read another quote from the book because it gets me every time. But there's a little part that says, "And as hard as this choice is, we break the pattern before the pattern breaks us." And again, it seems like he understands in the moment. We learn he doesn't really understand. So I hate that she really gives him credit for breaking the pattern when in reality she's breaking the pattern. But
Yeah.
the very last paragraph before we hit the final couple sentences says, "Cycles exist because they are excruciating to break. It takes an astronomical amount of pain and courage to disrupt a familiar pattern. Sometimes it seems easier to just keep running in the same familiar circles rather than facing the fear of jumping and possibly not landing on your feet." And if that ain't the truth, I don't know what is. But I love getting to watch Lily work through that and grow and heal afterwards in the next book. And I'll probably say this again in the next episode. I do think there was a really big moment to educate people in this book and in the next book. And in some ways we did do that. I just think there are some things that are missing, and it would have been even better if we could have just added those. It was a really good book. The first time I read it in under 24 hours. So
Well, and I really the epilogue scene, which we didn't really talk about, but Atlas basically at one point tells her that he will wait for her as long as she needs. And
I have the quote.
absolutely
Let me say it.
go for it.
In the future, if by some miracle you ever find yourself in the position to fall in love again, fall in love with me. You're still my favorite person, Lily. Always will be.
I'm going to be honest, to have a man that he wants to save her so bad, and yet he knows that he has to give her space to focus on herself. Love that. Love that so much. And then in the final epilogue scene, we end up finding out that they just cross each other by chance on the street. And I just absolutely love the scene where she was just like, I'm ready for you. And I really like too that she did not immediately go back to him. I love that she sat there and worked on herself before she decided to find Atlas and start something with him. Love that so much because oftentimes in a domestic violence situation, when they leave one, they end up going into another. So I think that I really appreciate that she was strong enough to say, hey, I've got to work on myself before I can come find you. And then when she does realize that she's in a good place, she can start something with him. She happens to run across him. So
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree because there is healing to be done. And it's okay to let someone help you heal, but at the end of the day, you actually have to heal yourself, or it's just going to continue to be a cycle that you're not going to break. But I really
so
love this book. I've probably said bad things throughout this episode, but I actually really like this book. So
So I guess that leads into what is your final rating on this book?
that's a great question. Even rereading it, I think I would actually stick with my original. I think I would give this book, and I'm going to be honest, I won't give any other Colleen Hoover book probably this rating. I'm not a big Colleen fan, but I haven't read a ton either, so that's not fair to say that. But I'd probably give this a 4.5 simply because the other point 0.5 would have been there if we had done a little bit more educating. It already is a good size book, so I understand needing to keep it a certain size, but I would have liked a little bit more education. But overall, it's the only one I've come across that like actually shows domestic violence, and in this sort of setting, a lot of times you get a lot of morally gray characters and fantasy and dark romance stuff like that, and that's different than this. It's not the same sort of intentions, so I do appreciate that, and it was interesting to see the sort of perspective from the mom's point of view, too, in some instances, so that I could understand that better. What about you?
So I gave it a 4.6 just because I did feel that some of it was unrealistic. It probably would have gotten a higher rating if I felt like it was more realistic and she got herself out of that kind of situation. However, I do love that she broke the cycle. Love that for her. But to me, there was just that realistic aspect that I don't feel like was there oftentimes with the situation. I would arguably say that 75 to 80% of the cycle starts with the fact that they're broke off from everybody. So I feel like the fact that Lily was not kind of ruined that realism for it. However, it did hit home in a lot of ways. So I related a lot with Lily. I really felt that the character grew up in a similar situation where she had to see certain things that she shouldn't have had to grow up more maturely to be able to focus on raising herself because her mother could not in that kind of situation. I related a lot with some of that, but I do really appreciate the characters that she did have significant, like Atlas, Alyssa. I do think that for those situations that people do have people like that, that was tremendous great. I think the way that Alyssa approached things was fantastic. You probably won't see that very often, but I think that was really good to see it in Atlas as well. I think he approached the situation maturely and respectfully of her own feelings, but more often than not, you're probably not going to find somebody like that. So to me, it was just that kind of realism thing that wasn't there that didn't hit quite home for me, but it still was really good.
Yeah, and like I said, the next book, I'm actually going to talk probably more about that because it's more focused on this happy ever after rather than the actual healing process. And I would have liked it a little bit more focused on the healing process. But yeah, so next week we obviously will be discussing It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, you can subscribe to get access to bloopers, extra content, and more on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Patreon, and YouTube. We would love to have you join us in the future again.
You can also send us book suggestions, comment on our post, or just general inquiries. You can send it to our email. It's like we read them at carlandpodcast.com. You can also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We release all of our episodes a month prior so that way you have an idea of what we're going to be reading and give you plenty of time to purchase it, rent it, whatever you're planning on doing to read it. Send us your thoughts. We would love to hear them. It's always good to get feedback.
You can also send us suggestions if you would like. We may or may not read them, but feel free to send them. It's always a possibility that we'll
Yes.
say yes. But I guess that's the end. So, as always, we promise to Carl them like we read them.